Ready.
Hello, everybody. It's Lisa Vassal with ForBetterHealthMedicine.com, and I'm thrilled to be coming to you today with Ashley Wheeler of AGentleLifeCollective.com. We're here to talk about spirit, coping, stress, and the insane weight that 2020, for lack of a better word, has put upon us. And not in a negative way. We want to bring it to you in a positive way, in a comforting way, and a self-compassion. So I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Lisa Vassal. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a nurse practitioner, and I own a functional medicine practice in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. And we work with supporting people to bring their body back to balance through finding the root cause of what is causing their body to be out of balance, whether that be a burden or a nutrient deficiency. It might be, those burdens could be nutrient deficiencies or stress, which is what today's about, or lack of sleep, or lack of joy, passion, purpose, lack of good food. It can be even things like food sensitivities or GI upset. So we'll get into that in the end. And that's what I'm doing with my patients. Ashley, what about you?
Yeah, it's great. Thank you so much for having me today, Lisa. Like Lisa mentioned, my name is Ashley Wheeler. I'm a licensed educational psychologist and life coach, and I work in private practice. Prior to the pandemic, my office was located in Worcester, Massachusetts. I'm currently working with clients virtually through telehealth. And within my practice, I work primarily with teen girls and young women, college-aged women, who are navigating the messy, overwhelming experiences of growing up and managing the many pressures that are there these days, while also trying to discover who they are and who they want to be in the world. And so a big cornerstone of the work that I do with my clients is really surrounding self-compassion, how we can be kinder, more loving to ourselves, chip away at some of the perfectionism that can be so rampant these days, and live a life that feels more settled, more authentic, and being able to put all of the things that my clients want to put out into the world.
And probably helping them find what those things are.
Yes.
Well, when Ashley and I were having a conversation, gosh, it was back in October, I think, right? About the levity that this year has brought upon many of us, both in a psychological standpoint, whether that be from isolation, from financial concerns, from grief. A lot of us have had many losses, and that grief can come from a grief of, for your age group and for my kids, that grief of their, college environment being cut short. So they, were pulled from college, came home. My two are athletes, so their seasons were completely cut short. And then even this fall, only one of them got to go back to school, and the other one got to go back to school, and she was playing, he was not. And there's a lot of grief and anger there, right? And loss. And then the idea that you can't work. So financially, you're at a different position, or if you are at work, there's fear. Like, what does that mean for me, especially all of these people that are working on the front line? And I have a ton of, as I'm sure you do, people that are working within the healthcare system. Then you have the fact that these kind of fears and grief and that insane isolation that we're all feeling perpetuates into other behaviors and other things that are unfortunately making it harder to get to that place of balance.
Yes. Such good points, especially coming from the perspective of, someone working with young people. This point that you bring up of grief is just so pervasive, I think, not only with adults, but again, with our youth. A lot of times I'll hear from parents saying, I'm not sure why this is so difficult. Like, they have all of their needs met. They're able to be home. They're able to learn through, virtual education. But I think
my son calls it Zoom University. He hates it, but keep going. Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly it. And there's a lot of burnout around all of the Zoom connections these days as well. But I think it's so important for us to remember that for young people, there have been a series of mini and maybe some larger losses that have happened. And this year may have been filled with more loss than they have ever experienced in their entire life yet. And so while to adults, certain things like needing to have maybe a virtual graduation or not necessarily having, a semi-formal dance might not seem like that big of a deal in the grand scheme of life. For teenagers, like, this is their life, and these are really big things. And so when we think about that compounded over the course of the last 9 months, that is really heavy.
It's really heavy. And, especially when you touch on those high school, the proms or the graduation, and it's not just the prom or the graduation, it's 100% everything that goes around that, right? So, having had, again, going back to say the people that are athletes or the people that are performers, right? So you can't have that performance, and that's what your whole life is. Or you're on the honor society. You can't do those things that bring in that boost. You can't go to the debates. You can't do the senior events for every single thing, whether that be, the awards nights or all of those things are incredible losses. And even my husband and I talked about, and as grown-ups, I'm going to get choked up. As grown-ups in March, we were in this amazing spot in life of watching we have twins, play and going to all these different games and meeting the people that are on their teams and becoming this, and it's just gone. So we can adapt, but to have that robbed from the teenagers where their life is this much experience, it's a huge loss for sure.
It is.
And that isolation is that much more magnified because yes, they live on their phone, but I don't know that they realize how much that interconnection, even though they're here, is so huge.
Yes.
It's been hard.
It has been, and such an interesting perspective, because we often can talk about this younger generation being so glued to technology and the connectedness of always being able to reach each other through social media and texting. Yeah. But what an interesting kind of paradigm shift this has been for them to realize, even though I'm so connected, that's actually not the kind of connection that is deep and meaningful and so necessary for us as human beings.
Right. So I've had so many people be like, oh no, it's so much better. I don't have to get dressed. I can stay in my pajamas, stay in my dorm. And they're so lucky they don't have to go to class. Both my kids are like, I just want to go to class. And one of them had a stats class that was in person, and then went all virtual. And she was like, I don't learn as well, those kind of things. So that lack of. So one of the things that we had talked a little bit about was the acceptance that comes around because just today I was looking online for something. Here we are, right? We're always online, looking for something, and it was talking about we know this, the suicide rates are skyrocketing in all age groups, especially in the age group that you're talking about. But more so, even the one that I read today, which I knew about, but this was a staggering statistic, is the rate of overdose. And that may or may not look like suicide. It may be a suicide, but often it's not even that. It's more just I need to numb, and then it's an accident, right? And so the true, as you said, acceptance and normalization of this, whether it be depression, anxiety, addiction.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Something that I think is so important that we just sort of set the foundation on is that, first of all, we need to be having more conversations around mental health. And mental health is something that we all have. But unfortunately, and often, we start to have these conversations only when we're speaking about mental illness. And so I'm so grateful that we're having this conversation today as another opportunity to start to chip away at some of the stigma that is still there around taking care of our emotional selves, our mental health. And a big part of having these conversations is to hopefully plant some seeds and give some strategies and provide some skills for people to be able to utilize to cope, to be able to handle the hard things in life. This is a hard thing, like on a magnetized sort of, platform. but there will be other hard things in life. And so if we can use this opportunity to find some ways to cope and accept and handle the hard parts of this, we can also better handle the things that will inevitably come in the future. And so I think when you're talking about addiction, when you're talking about numbing in general, there are much more accepted ways of numbing, whether we're talking about, scrolling on social media or eating that pint of Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah.
These are all ways that we cope in unhealthy ways to not have to feel the hard things that are there to feel. And often
some of that is actual legit biochemistry. So, I mean, especially when you're talking neurotransmitters, that's a dopamine rush. I mean, it may be very short-lived, and then there's the aftermath of, oh crap, I just ate a whole pint of Ben and Jerry's. Right. And then there's that guilt, and then there's that anger and fear and whatever. But that's not even, it's not, a lot of times people don't realize that it is a legit biochemical thing.
Yes. That's such a good point. And in the moment, it helps, right? And you bring up this great point of afterwards, there can be a lot of feelings of guilt or feelings of shame that come up on the other side of that. Most of us have never really learned how to sit with and be with our emotions. We can often, so many of us spend our whole life trying to fix what we're feeling. When we are feeling things we don't like, we go into fixer mode and we try to maybe practice self-care or practice distraction or do things to not have to necessarily sit with that uncomfortableness. But what we know is that our feelings want to be felt. They're not there to be fixed. And so I think a big first step in this is really honoring what is there to be felt, even if it's in small moments. I think it can feel really overwhelming for a lot of people to all of a sudden say like, okay, I'm going to sit with the really big uncomfortable feelings that are here during this time in our experience, and being really afraid of like, how am I going to handle this? And it doesn't have to be for long periods of time. We can just invite small moments to just check in and acknowledge, how are we feeling? Where are we feeling that in our body? And letting it move through. And
I think that's a really good point about where are we feeling it in the body. I can say that my father just recently passed away, and that whole, it wasn't so much about, of course, it's my dad passing away. That's going to be hard. It's more so there were some circumstances around that were hard for me and my siblings to all come to terms with, if that's what you call it. But more so that whole sitting with the emotion, it can be a little bit overwhelming to think like, I don't want to go there, Ashley, because sometimes you don't have time to really actually go there. And then like, how am I going to scoop my puddle up and go somewhere from there? What do you say to that?
Yes. It's this, and this is it in a nutshell, where you're saying, if I open the door, like I'm opening the floodgates, and how am I going to shut it? Mm-hmm. We really need to remember that if we don't give ourselves permission to feel whatever is there to be felt, it is going to make itself known at a certain point. There can be times where we can say, okay, you know what? I need to kind of put this here for right now because I have to do the things that I need to do to get through the day. But it's so important that we circle back and we make time for that experience. Because if we don't, it will come out in a variety of ways. It may come out as irritability with family or friends. It can come out in those moments of feeling like, again, kind of circling back to the numbing of like, okay, like I'm going to eat food, or I'm just going to numb out by just being on social media and just like not even consuming, but just that scrolling, whatever that happens to look like. But I think no one has ever, I know no one has ever died from feeling their feelings. And we need to remind ourselves of that. When the less we feel them, the bigger and the scarier they sort of become in our mind. But when I
think that you bring a really good point of when you said, if you don't feel them, it will come out another way, another time. And one of the things that I had when we were kind of collectively talking about this, I had written down things about, again, coming back to the anatomy and physiology and biochemistry of our unique bodies, when we are looking in functional medicine, we're not looking at a system or a diagnosis per se. We're looking at the dynamics at play that is upregulating or downregulating the ability for the body to either fight, protect, or just say, man, I got nothing, I'm all set. And so some of those, as you said, I have a lot of patients that come in and will have XYZ going on, and it was over the course of like a 3 to 5 year period that this and then that and then this and then that. And my statement is always, okay, I'm going to start from birth, and they think I'm crazy. They're 70 and I have to start from birth. But I'm going to go for like what this and this age group, what kind of came here, what kind of came here. And then we somehow, somewhere in a timeline say, oh, wait a second, you mean to tell me that your dad died, and you had a bad relationship with him and you were trying to get it together, and then he passed away quickly. Then your grandparents both died. Then you saw your best friend die. Then your child had, a cancer that is fine now. She's good, but that's fine. And then you had your dog died, and it was when your dog died, about a week later, you completely broke down, and now you have autoimmune conditions, or you have IBS, terrible constipation that doesn't get healed, joint pain, or whatever it might be, right? Hormone dysregulation. So when we're looking at that, it's 100% proven in medicine with science and all of the data that says cortisol, which is that fight or flight, which is protective, like you said, put it in a bucket, it holds you safe, it fights if it has to, but it's there. And even if you think you're doing okay, like during this prolonged 2020 9-month stress of, we don't know what the hell tomorrow's bringing, right? That cortisol is lowering something that it's called secretory IgA, which is a gut protection. Think of it like golden retriever in your backyard. And that's supposed to bark when someone comes in the yard. And you don't want a bunch of Cujos, because that would be really ugly and bad. And that's like kind of like fighting your own body. But you also need something to protect you. You don't want something, the dog sleeping in the backyard, right? So that lowered secretory IgA in your gut actually reduces the ability for your immune system to be strong, for your neurotransmitters to be strong, because that people don't realize that they're making neurotransmitters actually in the gut, 90% of them, through amino acids and vitamins and nutrients, that you can have actually a higher propensity for the immune system to start fighting different foods, like almost like a food sensitivity, even if there really isn't one, because of what they call leaky gut or intestinal permeability. It can affect not only our metabolism, as far as like really truly how easily, like people will be like, I did nothing different during this year and I've gained 20 pounds, right? Yeah. It's stress. You're literally weighed down by the ability for the metabolism to change because of the cortisol. Cortisol looks like blood sugar in our body. Insulin, for that reason, has to go in and kind of keep thinking it's fixing blood sugar, and there isn't even an increase in blood sugar. And so then it almost makes it so the insulin is inflammatory, right? Because it's too high, it's too much, and it's causing this metabolic and then hormone shift. And so things like our regular hormones, whether those be estrogens or testosterone, but also things like thyroid or things like vitamin D, and melatonin, those are all hormones that are affected hand in hand by, like you said, stress, right? Digestion, we know, they call it the second brain, right? So we know that that's 100% affected. That's driven by norepinephrine and epinephrine and all of those fight or flight cortisol type hormones. And then we have a lot of people that are saying like, well, now my hair's falling out, or I'm super tired, or my nails look funny. When you have all of those shifts, and especially for a 9-month period of time, and Lord knows, many of us had some stressors prior to March.
Of course.
So you add that on, and cumulative, on and on and on, you've got nutrients that can't be optimal. Even if you eat the best diet in the world and you're eating organic and grass-fed this and that, if you have a microbiome that isn't efficient, or your whole GI tract isn't working well, fight or flight reduces the stomach acid, reduces the motility and the ability for your body to optimally take nutrients and break them down. Therein lies the neurotransmitter differences, right? So we need B vitamins, we need D, we need all sorts of magnesium in order for the neurotransmitters to be made properly. And unfortunately, stress, cortisol, requires all of those nutrients. So it's like double negative.
Yes, yes. Which is a lot, right? For people to be able to wrap their minds around and almost think like, where can I even begin?
Yes. Now this is where we go. Yeah.
Right. Yes. And I love that you bring up the fact that most of us were living very stressful lives prior to the pandemic, right? So this is, we were trying to manage stress. And I think, I know at least in my practice, having lots of conversations around stress management prior to the pandemic. Then we throw this experience into our lives and we've never navigated this before. And so it's ramped up all of that sort of pre-existing stress that had been there. And so I think a big piece of this is having some conversations around, okay, we know this is where we're at right now. What are some things that we can do to help what we would say close the stress response cycle? And I want to share a wonderful podcast that will go into far more detail about this, but if there are any folks that are listening that are really interested in wanting to know more about burnout and the stress response cycle, Brene Brown's podcast, Unlocking Us, on October 14th, had a really, really wonderful interview with two sisters. I'll actually share their book, Emily and Amelia Nagasaki. And this is their book, all about burnout. And they had a really wonderful conversation with Brene about the impact of feeling stress in our lives and assuming that once the stressor is gone. So let's say, for example, we have a presentation that we need to do, whether it's for school or whether it's for work.
Or doing a webinar with you.
100% yes. And so we're stressed about this, we're worried, we're anxious, we want to make sure we do a really great job. And then the thing happens and we're like, oh, okay, the stress is over. That's not the final step. We need to tell our bodies that we're actually safe. We are okay. We are good. And most of us don't take that step. Most of us don't even know to take that step. And
well, I listened to that podcast and it was fantastic. So everybody should definitely, it's free, download it and listen. One thing that she used a really good example in that podcast about, you're walking through a street and some guy's whistling at you and calling you all sorts of sex names, and you're inside going, you're angrier and angrier and angrier, but you can't appropriately, you would likely get hurt if you were to say something back without protection, correct? So, the right thing to do, because she said most times it's better to just say, don't do that because it's offending me or it's bothering me that you're hurting my feelings. But in that unique case, she made a good example of you can't do that. But when you get home and you're still so angry and you're yelling about it and you're telling people, and I do this all the time, my kids will attest to that, you need to get to the point where you're explaining, how do you do that? How do you accept it and go back and live that spot and tell your body you're okay? Mm-hmm. How do you do it?
Yes. So there are a variety of ways. And I think, we can chat about a few of them at least today. I think one of them being physical movement. Physical movement does not have to be beating yourself up in the gym movement. Things as simple as being able to get outside and go for a walk, or getting on your treadmill, or just moving your body, whether that's
Qigong. We talked about Qigong and child pose and yoga, and like even just down dog child pose, not even yoga.
Yes, absolutely. Being able to sort of move that stress and that energy through your body and doing something with it, rather than in those moments sometimes, and we all do this, we vent about it, right? And it just kind of still stays there, festering.
It hurts and it's ugly and it feels yucky, for sure.
Absolutely. And so giving that energy a place to go and harnessing it in a way that's actually good for our bodies. Another way, and I will laugh about this with my clients, because so often I will say, let's go back to our breath. Like, are we breathing? Giving ourselves the opportunity to just really take some of those deep belly breaths, really getting that air in, whether it's, 3 to 5 good breaths to just regulate the nervous system a bit. One of my clients' favorite breathing exercises is something that's called square breathing.
Oh yeah, box breathing. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yes. And so for those who maybe are less familiar, I'll just kind of like use this book, which is sort of a square, as sort of an explanation of this. But essentially, you can find anything in your environment that's a square, and pretty much wherever we are, we can find that.
Computer.
Computer, exactly. And so the whole idea is to sort of breathe in while tracing along one side of that square for roughly maybe like 3 to 5 seconds, whatever feels good and okay for you. And then when you sort of get to that corner, just pausing for another 3 to 5 seconds as you're tracing down that side. And then breathing out for 3 to 5 seconds along the bottom, and then pausing again for 3 to 5 seconds before taking the next breath. I think what clients really often enjoy about that is it provides a visual, it provides a tangible in those moments sometimes where breathing can just feel so abstract. It kind of grounds a little bit in that moment to be able to help aid with that.
Another one that we use that box breathing a lot, and another one is 4-6-8. So breathe in for 1, 2, 3, 4 slowly, hold for 6, and then out for 8, and doing that 3 or 4 times.
Yes, I love that. Perfect. And I always, share that not one breathing exercise is going to be the one that will connect for each person. So we need to try on a few until we find the ones that really sort of, they jive for us and they feel like the most connected for us.
Yes, we also talked about meditation and tapping. So meditation, both of us had said that our favorite app was the Insight Timer, free. You can pay in, of course, for most of these things as well, but the free ones. And what I love about the Insight Timer and what my patients are like, very resistant to, is they don't want to meditate, right? So I actually had someone last week, I told her she wanted another supplement to calm her down. And I said, I agree, but I'd like you to try Tulsi tea. Tulsi tea is wonderful. It's holy basil. You can just make yourself a cup of tea. You could actually add in a little bit of green tea, whether that be caffeinated or not. That has L-theanine. Both of them are very calming and relaxing. I don't have time for that. I just want a tablet or capsule supplement. I looked at her, I said, okay, wait. If you don't have time for a cup of tea,
right.
We really will have a problem getting you better. We need to have time for a cup of tea. And so you may not.
If she doesn't have time for the cup of tea, it means she needs the time for the cup of tea.
Right? Bingo, right. So, people don't want to take that time, and I get it. Or they're feeling that they don't know how, or they can't concentrate on the meditation. And the reason I love Insight Timer is because you can do a 5-minute guided, 10, 7, whatever. You can choose the minutes. You can choose men versus female and the accents and whether you want music or not. The other one I really love is Headspace, especially if the first 30 days is free. Yeah. Because he recognizes, it's okay. Like he has you envision the traffic. I know that you're not watching the traffic. If that's okay, come back over and watch the traffic again. And just that whole, plus he has a really kind of a cute, sexy voice. I don't know if you've ever listened to him. That helps. Tapping, for sure, where it actually has some MRI research behind it. It actually changes the way the brain works. And it's simply starting at one area and going down. And when you're doing it, you're actually saying those things that you're the most anxious about. And there's plenty of YouTube videos. Dean Ortner, I forgot his name, Nick Ortner, and his sister both have a wonderful, thetapping-solution.com. They have tons of free material as well. They actually went down to Sandy Hook when that whole thing happened and taught the whole town. And so when you look at MRI before and after, it's actually, you start out saying all those things that you're anxious and angry or worried about, sad about, stressed about, grieving about. And then at the end, it's you say the 3 things that you're most positive about. And that in reality, if it doesn't. So in other words, like, what if I fail a test? What if I fail a test? I'm going to feel it. I know I'm going to feel it. And then it's, well, even if I do fail the test, I'm going to be okay. Those kind of things like, well, even if this does happen, I'm going to be okay. Even if I cry my eyes out and I can't collect myself, I'll be okay. It's going to happen. And making it okay to cry, making it okay to be sad and to be depressed and to be anxious and to be in a state of needing support from others and being honest with them that you need that.
Yes. So important because many people feel a lot of shame around having to reach out for support. Many times I will hear from clients, and I know colleagues have shared this as well, that people will reach out having been able to, like, quote unquote, hold it together for so long. And they're feeling really ashamed about the fact that right now, given the circumstances of life, they're not feeling like they can hold it together in the same ways that they have been able to in the past.
Right.
And man, like none of us can hold it together forever. And none of us can navigate life alone. We need support and we need that connectedness with other people. And so I will often say the time to reach out for support, whether that's through a therapist or a coach or whatever source of support that you need, is not when things are at a crisis level. It's actually during these times where you're able to say, you know what, like things feel a little bit harder than they used to. How can I optimize the ways that I'm talking to myself, the ways that I am coping with things? That is an ideal time to start. Of course, if you're at a crisis level, please, please, please reach
Well,
out.
and that's the same in health. So we have our patients that come to us who have been to 17 different practitioners. They've been sick for 6, 10 months or years, and they're coming to us because they just can't figure out what's wrong with them, and they can't get better, or they're afraid of getting that much worse. And it's like, gosh, the people that walk in the door and say, my whole family has XYZ, I'm kind of hoping I don't go there. Can you tell me how to avoid that? It's like, oh, this is exactly what we need to see people, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And circling back to this idea of normalizing mental health, knowing that just like we normalize health and being proactive with health.
Agree 100%.
Yes,
Why is it normal that people are diabetic, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obese? And I'm not saying it is. It's a normal thing. That's what people struggle with that. People also struggle with, joint pain. I mean, it's all, why is that any different when people are talking about their high blood pressure pill that they talk about their Lexapro? Like, they won't even talk about it. They won't mention it, but they'll talk about everything else. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. And especially, I have a family member, my sister-in-law actually, wonderful, beautiful, incredibly gorgeous and brilliant woman, ended her life right before she turned 50. And it was devastating. And I think that as a practitioner, we're taught so many things. We are not taught how to do suicide. And so how to prevent it, how to work with people to listen and look and act for all the right, all the clues, and how to normalize the fact that mental health is not a bad thing.
Right, right. I think we could have a whole separate podcast, talking about suicide and ways that we can talk to people that we love about their mental health. Go ahead.
Just real quickly, if we can touch on it just for those people that may be listening and may be thinking, what can I do right now if I am feeling really desperate?
Yes. So for people who are feeling in that sort of crisis space, there are crisis text lines. There's a suicide text line, and I'm happy to provide some resources. Maybe we can put kind of in the sidebar.
Definitely.
Video. Text options are wonderful. They're great also for teenagers and young people who feel more anxious, often talking over the phone. There are still suicide crisis phone lines that you can call. Always knowing that if you are in a true mental health crisis, you can always access support through your local emergency room. There are always clinicians that are there to talk with you and help provide any supports that may benefit you most in that moment. For those who maybe are struggling, but not at that crisis level, but are knowing that like, man, this conversation is really helping me understand that maybe now is the time to reach out to a therapist and have some conversations. A great place to start is by going to psychologytoday.com. No matter where you are in the country, you can put in your zip code. And what's really beautiful about it is that there will be lots and lots of profiles of therapists in your area with pictures of them. I know sometimes it can be really helpful to not only read a little bit of a bio, but also see a face. We all connect to different people. And so it can be just like a nice place of feeling like, wow, okay, like this looks like someone that I might feel comfortable talking to and sharing with. And so I think that, depending on sort of where you're at, those are a couple great resources to be able to access. I think from the perspective of, being someone who might be concerned about a family member's mental health, whether that's a sibling, whether that's a parent, whether that's a child, knowing that there is such power in asking the question of like, how are you really doing? Right? And really connecting in that way. There can be a lot of fears around asking pointed questions of, if I sort of have this conversation and I open this door and they start sharing some really dark things with me, if I ask, are you having thoughts of killing yourself? That might plant the seed of like, oh, maybe then they'll do it. That is probably one of the largest myths. I think there is actually so much comfort that comes from having someone ask that question, right? For holding space for that and saying, like, if you're feeling this way, we can talk about that and we can find support and we can get help. So I think number one, opening the door to conversations, even though they're uncomfortable and they can be scary and they can be hard, but it's the first step in acknowledging that this is a very real experience and being able to harness the supports around our loved ones that really need it.
That's awesome. Thank you. When you were talking, it brought me back to that book and that interview that I was listening to. And basically what they're saying, the preface of that whole, in this unique year, is the lack of that presentation is over. The confrontation with that jerk on the street is over. It's this perpetual wake up every day. What is going to hit me in the news today? Which I say, don't watch the news if it's feeding into that. What is going to hit me as far as illness? And some people, like I said, healthcare providers or some people that are working on the front lines aren't able to avoid that by sitting in their house. And so it's that recognition of this is every day. I feel you, I see you. This is the self-compassion, the ability to be grateful for what isn't. For Thanksgiving, it was usually there's 20 of us. It was 6 of us, yes. Right? And it was, I had bought this. In fact, I brought it out so that I could bring it up. I thought it was pretty fun. I had seen it, of course, on social media, but it's called Less Small Talk, More Genuine Conversations.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and it's cards. And so we pulled a card, each of us, and each person at the table had to answer it. And it's just more in-depth questions. And one thing that was funny, my husband's like, I don't think 2020 was all that bad. He's like, think about this. And he's like, we got way more time together. Like, I've never worked from home. So Mom's never worked from home. And that's the most we've ever done. We fixed up this in our house and we did this. And it was just this amazing gratitude that it shifts it completely shifts, right? So gratitude journaling, waking up, thinking about positive thing from yesterday. What do I want to get positive today? Right?
Yes, absolutely. And not dismissing all of the hard.
No.
And all of the suffering that is happening in the world. We can acknowledge that and we can still find gratitude, right? There's space for both.
Right. And it's like again, bringing it back to my father passing away in the midst of all of this going on with my siblings. And yet there was a couple times that we got ourselves laughing so hard we were crying. And it was like, how in the world does your body shift so and be able to balance that, right? And that's the key word that we're talking about. Let's see. Yeah, you had talked about not easy being a time to be human. One thing that you and I had talked about when you talk about movement, and you said a felt practice together. Can you talk about that a little bit? Felt practice.
Yes. So I'm just noticing there's a little bit of a break in our connection for a second, but I think we're back.
Oh, hopefully we don't lose it.
I know. So many, hopefully so many nuggets of wisdom for everyone who's listening. So what I was really hoping to convey actually in this, what I called a bit of a felt practice, is this opportunity to tune in, to check in with ourselves, to really see what is there to be felt. So having an opportunity, I'm happy to share a guided meditation for those who might want to actually practice this as a bit of a meditation, but just briefly touching on noticing, right? So noticing at some point in our day where we can just pause for a second and say, like, how am I right now? How am I doing? Am I doing okay? Am I not doing okay? And what does that look like, right? And starting to go from the cerebral only being in our thoughts and really connecting back into the body. So where is that feeling showing up? Is it showing up as heaviness on your chest? Is it showing up in a little bit of a racing heart? And just noticing, not judging it, not saying like, oh God, like, why am I feeling like this again? Like, I can't deal with this. I need to just keep moving forward. Like, no, just noticing and honoring what is there to be felt in this moment. Giving it some space, taking some breaths, and then being able to just close out with a little bit of extending that gratitude to yourself for having given yourself the opportunity to tune in. And again, this is that act of being able to shift from autopilot and just going through the motions of the day and kind of ignoring some of those moments where maybe we are feeling a little bit more stressed, or we're remembering something that was really hard, or we're remembering a loss and we're feeling sad in that moment. Just being able to give it a little bit of space. Sort of going back to what we were saying, if we don't give ourselves that space, if we don't do that consistently, it's going to trickle out in other ways that are unintended. And so again, it's this act of dipping our toe in, sort of when you had asked, how can we do this without the floodgates opening? It's those small little moments, those small acts of self-kindness, of saying, you know what, I want to be curious about all parts of my experience. It's only in, and this is sort of, I have such a love for Brene Brown. I'll often joke, like, she's like who I want to be when I grow up. But she often shares this idea of when we numb the hard emotions, when we don't feel the hard stuff, we're also numbing our capacity for feeling true joy and happiness and love
and growth
in
right.
those full ways that they should be embraced. And knowing, none of us really enjoy sitting with the hard stuff, but it is part of our human experience. And in order to sort of bring things full circle and honoring all parts of our experience, the light and the dark, we have to make room for that.
Right. And I think that you make a really good point, because when I'm working with patients, I'll often say, what brings you joy, passion, and what is your purpose? And they go, and they almost can't even think of what some people will say my kids, or maybe they love their job, but what is truly bringing you joy? And is that smelling a cool perfume or a lotion, or is it sitting and watching a kitten, or is it going outside and smelling the outdoors and trying to find something? And one of the things that I've started to do on my daily walks, because I used to do a ton of huge heavy duty workout, and that shifted, of course, given the pandemic, but also more so I found that I was getting to the point where it was adding a cortisol suck, and that I needed to actually pull it down a notch and do more walking and some yoga and meditation. And even just a little bit of lifting, but more so like a wall sit and a push-up versus a ton of weights, just because of that. So in that being said, when I go for my walks, I try to find a picture of something super cool. It, like, maybe something funky, maybe something pretty, maybe something weird, or pretty, whatever. But that is my way of trying to pay attention to what I am doing. And I think if you've ever, I forget this, it was a webinar or a podcast I listened to, and they had talked about, they had planted 4 or 5 or 6 different things going into a conference. And it was a conference on being present, which was the funniest part. And and I forget what the conference was, but it was, say, 100 people going into this conference, and they had planted weird things upon the entrance of going into the room for the conference. And I'll use an example of like a elephant statue, something. And they asked the audience, there were 5 or 7 different things. Can anyone name what those might be? And of course, they start looking around, and only 3 people could come up with like 4 or 5 of the, like, I thought it was weird that there was an elephant statue. I thought it was weird that there was a mannequin over there, but people weren't even paying attention. So even just that, of being grounded, of being like, okay, I'm going to be present. I can walk. I can breathe. I can laugh. You can listen to something funny when you're outside. You can listen to a podcast. You can listen to the crap that my kids listen to. If it feeds your soul, do it.
Right.
To make you move and to make you smile and get some fresh air, for sure.
Yes. And this is mindfulness in a nutshell, right? So when I often explain mindfulness to clients, many people think of that as sort of, meditation. So sitting on a cushion, listening to some type of meditation for, like you said, 20 minutes. And it feels so overwhelming. But really, when we break it down, mindfulness is the act of paying attention to the present moment without judgment. And so these opportunities of being able to go on your walk and really notice and be looking for and paying attention, what a beautiful opportunity of practicing mindfulness in a way that is not meditation. Meditation can be wonderful, but mindfulness does not have to be meditation. And sometimes I will encourage clients to think about things that they're already doing in their everyday life that they can pay more attention to. And so an example that I'll often give is taking a shower in the morning. How often, I know I can speak for myself at least, when I'm taking a shower in the morning, I'm thinking about like, okay, like what time do I have this? What is the next thing? What does my day look like today? And then after I'm like, did I wash my hands? I'm not really sure. And so being able to just even pay more attention when we're showering, right? Notice, how it feels to sort of scrub your scalp and how the water feels as it's hitting your body and the smells of the soap or the lotions that you're using in the shower. So again, just tuning in, and a great way of doing that is using our senses to just pay attention. It's not adding one more thing to your day, because most of us have enough going on. It can just feel like too much to add one more thing. But when we can harness the moments that we do have, the experiences that we're already enacting in our lives, and do that with a little bit more presence, can really be a game changer.
It so can. And then one thing that on the opposite side of self-love and self-gifting and gratitude and presence, is the opposite of, if you can cut down on those things that innately trigger negativity or adding to that emotion of anxiety, depression, fear. And, I'm not saying don't watch the news. People need to know what's going on, but maybe do it in your own way. Click on a website, read real quick, and then shut it off, where it's not feeding your brain all the time. Don't have things pop up on your phone that are negative and scary and reminding you of the crisis of the world that may or may not really be affecting yourself. Shut off the news. Is somebody in your life adding to that in a way that you're supporting them so much that you don't have any reserve for yourself? Protecting yourself from that. Those are the kind of things. Anything else that you can think of?
Well, as you're saying this, Lisa, I'm thinking a lot about healthy boundary setting, right? And noticing things that are okay and not okay for you, and starting to get really clear on that.
Social media, some people just get negative immediately when they start with, take it off.
Yes. At least get rid of the notifications. That's another piece where, like our phones are pinging all day, and there's this innate stress that comes from that, knowing that there's always someone needing something, wanting something, reaching out, or an obligation that we have coming up.
Judging something.
Judging, yes, that's a big one. As you mentioned, social media, I often recommend doing a social media detox, in the sense of really checking in and saying, what I'm consuming, is this adding to my life? Is it bringing me joy? Is it making me feel good? Or when I'm on social media, am I feeling worse about myself? Am I comparing myself? Am I seeing a lot of people who are traveling and seem to be doing really exciting things? And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just like stuck in my house. Like, this is really awful. Right? Being able to notice what's happening for you when you're consuming this information, and either unfollowing certain accounts, or there are ways that you can hide certain accounts. If there are certain family members or friends, like, we all have those, where sometimes like it would be helpful to just hide some of that, so it's not so in your face, and giving yourself permission to do that, because what we consume actually does, I think, sometimes have an even greater impact on our emotional experience than we cognitively realize in the moment.
For sure. Amazing. So one thing that I had posted on my personal page, and I plan to post with this, I waited to post it with this for our talk, was the paper plate.
Oh, I love that so much. Please.
And so I'm gonna read it sort of as a closure to not only self-acceptance and being okay with needing or asking for help and recognizing that this is big. And it doesn't have to be heavy and angry and bad. It can be okay. That balance, like you say, recognize it, but we need to work on the other side, weighing it down to make sure that it's not the one. So this plate just says, maybe you think someone doesn't have a ton on their plate compared to you, but maybe their plate is smaller than yours and doesn't have a lot of room to begin with. Or maybe their plate is paper and their flimsy paper plate can't hold as much as your sturdy ceramic plate can. Or maybe their plate was broken and it is now held together by glue. So it is so potent for what's going on any time of the world, any time of the year, but for sure right now and moving forward, especially holidays tend to be hard on a lot of people. And so, there is so much, and it's okay. It's just okay.
Yeah, it is okay. And, something before we close out that I did want to acknowledge that is so embedded in this beautiful conversation that we're having together today, is that there's a lot of privilege in our conversation, right? Where it's so important that we remember that there are so many members of our community that are struggling with food and shelter insecurity right now and financial instability. And I believe that for those of us who have enough right now, it is part of our duty to give to those who don't. And this ability to sort of provide these acts of service is something that not only helps those who are in need, but it's really sort of like that gift that keeps on giving.
Well, and it actually will help do that grateful balance. Like when you give, it actually feels better than receiving.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think maybe that's, one of our final little takeaways here, that if we have the ability to give, whether that is financially or donating food or donating our time in a way that feels safe for us right now, what a
Write
gift.
A note, writing notes. Yeah. Totally. I love that, Ashley.
Absolutely. And so, so thank you so much, Lisa, for
thank you. This has been fantastic.
This was so
all right.
great.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much. You take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
All of the other things in the bio page.
Perfect. Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.